The morning Julian Drake kicked over a plastic bucket and hurled his termination notice straight into the chest of the elderly janitor. Half the office on the 40th floor held its collective breath. Julian strode through the lobby, radiating fury. Grinding his $2,000 alligator skin shoes into a worn-out mop, while his staff pressed themselves against the glass walls, eyes glued to the floor. The VP of Operations called the old man a parasitic piece of trash. The head of security shook his head and stepped in to escort him out. Everyone present shared the exact same thought. The janitor had crossed the wrong man and had just lost his only means of survival, so why wasn't the old man trembling or begging? If you have ever witnessed someone use a sliver of power to trample those beneath them, stay tuned. This story is for you. Scoot to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Arthur Sterling had dedicated 40 years of his adult life to building Vanguard Tech, and throughout that time he never once forgot where he started. This company wasn't just a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. It was the only thing he had built from scratch in a dingy garage with nothing but a soldering iron and $20 in his pocket. Now at 68, Arthur carried the broad shoulders and cautious demeanor of a man who had spent years making life-or-death decisions. 3 months ago, his doctor told him he needed heart surgery and urged him to retire. The Vanguard CEO chair was about to be left empty. The board of directors had their eyes on Julian Drake, a 32-year-old financial prodigy with a Harvard degree who had delivered astronomical profit margins. Arthur wasn't a man who believed in dry financial reports. He believed the soul of a company lay in how it treated those at the bottom of the payroll, so he told the board he was heading to Switzerland for a retreat. In reality, he donned the blue jumpsuit of the cleaning crew, put on a name tag that read Richard, and returned to his own company as a day-shift janitor. In his faded blue janitor's uniform, Arthur became completely invisible. That invisibility afforded him a brutal privilege. Seeing how Vanguard Tech was truly gasping for air behind its polished revenue reports, Vanguard had once been built by Arthur like a family, a place where creative minds were free to nurture their dreams. But now, under Julian Drake's guidance, it had turned into a heartless meat grinder. Julian worshipped optimization. To him, human beings were just the most annoying variable, something to be filed down with fear. The atmosphere on the 40th floor was perpetually thick with tension. Arthur quietly pushed his trash cart through the hallways. Hearing the frantic clacking of keyboards and stifled sighs, at 7:30 a.m. on that fateful Wednesday, Arthur was cleaning the front desk when Julian appeared. He threw his expensive coffee cup into the trash right in front of a young receptionist named Sarah, splashing some of it onto her blouse. "Sarah, how many times have I told you?" Julian tapped his fingers on the glass desk, his voice monotone yet ice-cold. "My VIP clients drink imported Italian sparkling water, not the cheap purified stuff you just put in the boardroom. Do you think this is a billion-dollar company or a roadside gas station?" I'm sorry, Mr. Drake," Sarah stammered, standing up with a shaking voice. "The supplier delivered the wrong order this morning. I was about to run down to the lobby market to exchange it. Vanguard doesn't pay you to about-do things. Vanguard pays you to ensure everything is perfect." Julian cut her off, his eyes narrowing with contempt. "If your brain is only good for menial chores and you still manage to mess them up, go apply at a fast food joint. Fix it now or pack your things." When Julian turned on his heel, Sarah buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Arthur quietly pushed his cart over and handed her a tissue. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes, hidden beneath the brim of his cap, held a profound sense of heartache. But Julian's cruelty didn't stop at low-level staff. Half an hour later, in the core programming department, Julian slammed a stack of documents onto the desk of Mark, a veteran software engineer with dark circles under his eyes, who had dedicated 6 years to the company. "What is this trash?" Julian growled. "I told you to finish this module by 8 a.m. today, Mr. Drake." Mark looked up, his face pale and panicked. "My wife. She went into labor at 2 a.m. The doctor said the birth has dangerous complications. I stayed up all night coding, but I just couldn't finish it. I'm just asking for this morning off to go to the hospital. I promise I'll make it up. Off? Does the hospital pay your salary, Mark? Julian curled his lip in a sneer. A smile that made those around him shiver. He leaned down, bracing his hands on Mark's desk, and whispered each word like a blade. Listen to me clearly. The code doesn't care about your personal life, and neither do I. But it's my first child, Mark pleaded, his voice on the verge of breaking. And this project decides the company's Q3 cash flow. Julian coldly blocked the engineer's hope. An intern in Bangalore could write this module for half your salary, and he certainly wouldn't use wife giving birth as an excuse to slack off. The choice is yours, Mark. Walk out that door to be a good husband, and tomorrow you won't have the money to buy milk for your kid. You choose. Mark bit his lip until it bled. His body trembled with rage and helplessness. Finally, under the weight of bills and medical costs, the young father slumped into his chair. He buried his face in his hands for a moment, then shakily placed his fingers on the keyboard, continuing to type soulless lines of code while his wife fought for her life in the delivery room. Julian patted Mark's shoulder, satisfied, and stood up straight. That's the attitude of someone who wants to survive. A few steps away, Richard, the janitor, stood motionless, his hand gripping the edge of his trash bag. Arthur's knuckles were white. Through his calm eyes, he saw through the immense arrogance of the VP. Julian Drake might have raised the company's profits by 15%, but he had stolen 100% of its soul. Arthur didn't say a word. He quietly took a freshly brewed cup of hot tea from his cart and gently placed it on the corner of Mark's desk with a small, comforting nod. Mark looked up at the janitor and whispered a choked thank you. In that moment, the verdict for Julian Drake was officially sealed in Arthur Sterling's mind. This rot had to be pulled out by the roots. The main lobby of Vanguard Tech was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to overwhelm anyone who walked through the doors. That day, the air in the lobby was pulled tight as a guitar string. The investment delegation from Tokyo would walk through the revolving doors in less than 2 hours. At 9:45 a.m., Julian Drake emerged from the executive elevator, striding through the lobby with the haste of someone who considered himself the center of the universe. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit from Milan, a piping hot espresso in his hand, his eyes glued to his iPad. Through his Bluetooth earpiece, he was relentlessly berating some mid-level project manager. I don't care about the reasons. Make them work through lunch. I want that report on my desk before 11. Julian shouted, his voice echoing through the massive hall, making employees passing by instinctively lower their heads and quicken their pace. In the middle of the aisle, Arthur was diligently pushing his floor polishing machine. He worked slowly and meticulously with the rhythm of a true craftsman. Noticing that the freshly polished Italian marble still had a thin film of moisture, Arthur carefully placed a bright yellow caution, "Wet floor," sign right in the center of the main path, where it was most visible, but Julian wasn't looking at the path. His eyes were glued to the screen, and his arrogance led him to assume the world around him would automatically part ways to make room for him. He stepped directly onto the wet marble. The impact of his expensive alligator skin heels on the slick surface was an unavoidable disaster. A sharp, hollow sound rang out. The 165-pound VP flew into the air for a brief, breathless moment before slamming hard onto the cold floor. The iPad skidded 3 meters away, its screen shattering. Even worse, the espresso in his hand tipped over, dumping the entire contents of dark, scalding liquid onto his pristine white silk shirt and the lapels of his expensive vest. The entire lobby went silent. The space holding 100 people suddenly fell into a deathly hush. The typing at the reception desk stopped. 2 large security guards stood frozen in place. No one dared to breathe. Everyone stared in horror at the powerful VP lying in a disheveled heap in a puddle of water, smelling of sharp, acidic coffee. Julian pushed himself up with his hands. His face turned from pale with shock to bright red, then a deep, bruised purple with humiliation. He looked down at his ruined clothes, then lifted eyes filled with red streaks, scanning the lobby. His gaze stopped at the old janitor holding the mop, less than 2 meters away. "You blind old fool," Julian roared, his voice tearing through the silence. He scrambled up and kicked the yellow caution sign, sending it smashing into the glass wall. Arthur responded gently, his voice calm and incredibly patient. "Mr. Drake, I placed the warning sign very clearly. The floor was wet, and you weren't looking." "Shut your filthy mouth!" Julian lunged forward, stabbing a finger straight at Arthur's face. His rage had cost him all sense of reason. "Do you know who I'm meeting? The Tokyo delegation will be here in less than an hour. And do you know this shirt costs half your damn salary? Trash at the bottom of society like you only know how to sponge off others and sabotage the efforts of those who actually make money." Arthur stood there, his calloused hands gripping the handle of the mop. He didn't step back an inch, beneath the brim of his hat. There was no fear of a worker terrified of losing his job. It was the quiet, deep gaze of an abyss staring at a raging wave crashing against a cliff. "A company cannot exist without those who clean it, Mr. Drake," Arthur said, his voice low but loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Without the people at the bottom keeping the foundation solid, there are no heights for you to stand on." That sentence was like a gallon of gas poured onto a fire. To be lectured by a lowly janitor, someone he considered a sunk cost, right in front of dozens of subordinates, humiliated Julian's massive ego to the core. He laughed, a thin, dry, and malicious laugh. "Hates and bottoms, you like philosophy, old man?" Julian nodded, taking a step back and pointing his finger at his coffee-stained alligator shoes. "Fine, then let me show you where the bottom really is. Kneel down." Sarah, the receptionist he had berated earlier, covered her mouth with her hand, horrified. "Are you deaf? I said kneel." Julian hissed, his eyes bulging. "Use your filthy apron to wipe every drop of coffee off my shoes right now. Make them shine. If you don't, not only are you fired this very second, but I will use every connection I have to ensure no building, no restaurant, or gas station in this city dares to hire a useless old man like you again. Kneel and clean my shoes." The cruelty was laid bare. Julian Drake wanted to strip away the last bit of dignity from a man old enough to be his father, just to serve his own petty arrogance. But Arthur remained motionless. The atmosphere seemed to freeze. All eyes were on the old man in blue. His decision was made from the very marrow of his bones, without a second of hesitation. "I do not kneel before anyone, Mr. Drake," Arthur said, each word ringing out clearly, heavy as lead weights dropped onto the marble floor. That definitive refusal was the straw that broke the camel's back. Julian lost all control. He lunged, grabbed Arthur's work shirt, ripped the plastic name tag off his chest, threw it into the dirty puddle on the floor, and stomped on it. Get out of my building! Right now!" Julian screamed until his voice cracked, spittle flying. He turned and roared at the 2 security guards standing stunned. "You useless idiots! Get this old man out of here for me! Throw all his rags out into the dumpster!" The 2 large guards hesitated, their faces showing clear reluctance. Everyone in the building knew Richard was a gentleman, but the VP's order was absolute, and their livelihoods were in his hands. When one guard reached out to touch his shoulder, Arthur simply lifted a hand. It was a very small gesture, but it radiated an invisible power that made the guard falter and instinctively pull his hand back. He didn't bother to look at Julian a second time. Arthur quietly reached behind his neck and untied his wet apron. He folded it neatly and carefully placed it on the edge of his cart. Slowly and calmly, without a single bow, without a single hurried step, Arthur Sterling turned his back and steadily walked out through the revolving glass doors. The baggage he left behind was not humiliation, but the gasping, angry breaths of the VP, who stood in the middle of the coffee puddle, deluding himself that he had just won. Julian Drake's sandcastle had begun to crack the moment that glass door closed. Julian Drake's cruelty lay not just in how he trampled others, but in how he erased them from his mind the very next second. To him, firing an elderly janitor was no different than brushing a speck of dust off his lapel. It didn't leave a single ripple in his conscience. At exactly 10:30 a.m., Julian stepped out of the VIP washroom reserved for senior executives. He had washed away the acidic smell of coffee and donned a second spare suit, a Tom Ford handcrafted Navy masterpiece, paired with a matching gray silk tie. He stood before a full-length mirror, meticulously smoothing every fold, spritzed on a touch of Creed Aventus, and gave his reflection a practiced smile. In just 30 minutes, the beast that had roared in the lobby that morning had been hidden away, replaced by a perfect model of a businessman. Composed, confident, and charismatic, at 11 a.m., the frosted glass door of the VIP boardroom opened. Mr. Tanaka and the investment delegation from Tokyo entered. Julian strode over to greet them. He bowed at a precise 45-degree angle, greeting them in fluent and extremely polite Japanese. His demeanor was so refined that even the most difficult investors nodded in satisfaction. Once everyone was seated, Julian stepped up to the podium. Gone was the lack of control from that morning. Julian now turned into a terrifying negotiating machine. He didn't use hollow words, he used numbers. On the high-definition projection screen, exploding profit charts appeared like a perfect painting. Mr. Tanaka, my operating philosophy at Vanguard Tech is simple. A company is a machine, and to make it run fastest, we must ruthlessly remove the rusty gears, Julian said, his tone smooth and hypnotic. He clicked the remote to a slide titled Resource Optimization in Reality, the ruthless layoff plan he intended to submit to the board that afternoon. We will completely cut 30% of overhead costs from our low-level workforce, transitioning to outsourced services at half the cost. This streamlining will pour all capital into our core technology, ensuring your profit margins increase by at least 20% over the next 2 years. Julian smiled, a smile he believed to be that of a visionary. He even considered firing people like the janitor that morning an achievement to present to investors. Mr. Tanaka intertwined his fingers, listening intently. He was a seasoned businessman, and in the cold world of capitalism, the numbers Julian painted were truly attractive. Drake, Tanaka spoke through an interpreter. Your decisiveness is impressive. Vanguard Tech under your leadership is truly a beast hungry for prey. Julian bowed with fake humility. Sir, that is only the beginning. Julian's slick and cold demeanor completely won over the delegation. At exactly 1 p.m., Montblanc fountain pens were pulled out. Mr. Tanaka smiled, nodded, and signed a $50 million funding agreement. Camera flashes from the PR department went off continuously, capturing the most glorious moment in the VP's career. After personally seeing the delegation to their car, Julian returned to his private office. As soon as the oak door closed, the mask of politeness fell away. He threw the file onto his desk, leaned his head back, and let out a loud, long laugh. The laughter echoed in the cavernous room, filled with the satisfaction of someone who thought he had the world in his grasp. He hit the intercom. Chloe, bring me a bottle of 2012 Dom Perignon and 2 crystal glasses. Right now, less than 2 minutes later. The trembling secretary walked in with the tray. Julian poured the wine himself. The champagne bubbled and sparkled in the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He pushed a glass toward Chloe and raised his own. You see, Chloe? Julian took a sip of the expensive wine, his eyes locked on the $50 million contract signed by Mr. Tanaka. $50 million. None of those conservative board members could have brought in a figure like this. Congratulations, Mr. Drake. You've worked very hard. Chloe replied, trying to force a smile even though she was still haunted by the morning's cruelty in the lobby. Julian swirled the crystal glass in his hand, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, and looked straight down at the tiny street below. This afternoon at 2, the board will have no choice but to kneel and hand the CEO chair to me, Julian whispered, his eyes gleaming with frenzied ambition. Arthur Sterling, a senile old man past his prime harboring dreams of humanity and business. This company needs a new king, someone who knows how to hold the whip. He suddenly remembered the janitor's words from the morning. Without the bottom, there is no top. Julian sneered, finishing the rest of his wine. Bottom and top, how ridiculous. The top is where you trample others to climb, and I am standing at the highest point. He glanced at the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, 1:45 p.m. Julian Drake adjusted his tie and buttoned his vest. He strode out of his office with the poise of an emperor walking to his own coronation. He walked on the clouds of his own arrogance, unaware that right behind the boardroom door the guillotine had been sharpened, waiting for his arrogant head. The boardroom on the 45th floor of Vanguard Tech was like no other workspace. It was a cathedral of power. The entire room was paneled in dark oak, with bulletproof glass walls overlooking the city shrinking beneath its feet. Dominating the room was a 15-meter-long mahogany table, polished to a mirror finish, surrounded by 12 soft calfskin chairs at exactly 2 p.m. The atmosphere in the room was one of extreme solemnity and silence. 10 board members, elite individuals holding billions of dollars in assets, were already seated. Only 2 chairs were left empty. One was the seat at the head of the table on the right, the position for the new CEO to be appointed today. And the second was the chair at the center, the largest and most powerful, the throne of the chairman and largest shareholder, Mr. Arthur Sterling. The boardroom door opened. Julian Drake strode in, bringing a suffocating air of pressure. He didn't walk, he marched. Instead of sitting in the VP's chair, Julian walked straight to the head of the table. He slammed a thick, genuine leather file, embossed with the gold seal of the Tokyo conglomerate, onto the center of the table. The sharp sound made several of the older members jump. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian braced his hands on the table, leaning forward, his burning eyes sweeping across every face. I know you are worried about the third quarter financial reports, but stop worrying. Inside this file is Mr. Tanaka's signature. A $50 million direct investment contract which I just closed an hour ago. The room erupted in gasps of surprise. A few younger members nodded, their eyes unable to hide their greed. Julian stood up straight, talking while clasping his hands behind his back, slowly pacing around the table. But that $50 million will vanish like smoke if we keep supporting such a bloated machine. My plan for next quarter is simple. Pull out the rotting roots. He pressed a button on the remote, and a bright red personnel reduction chart appeared on the large screen. I will fire 30% of low-level staff, permanently cancel the full health insurance fund for the cleaning, security, and maintenance groups. People who mop floors and pick up trash don't create surplus value. They are just parasites sucking on our profit margins. We will switch to cutthroat temporary contracts. Anyone who can't handle the pressure can just filter themselves out. That is how we will turn Vanguard into an empire that cannot be toppled. Very decisive, very cold-blooded, Mr. Henderson. One of the oldest board members, who had been with the chairman since the early days, coughed lightly and spoke up. He interlaced his wrinkled hands, looking at Julian with deep eyes. 50 million is an impressive figure, Mr. Drake. You have proven your ability to make money. But you forgot one core thing. Julian frowned slightly, the smile on his lips stiffening. What did I forget, Mr. Henderson? The decision to appoint the new CEO does not depend on our vote, Henderson replied slowly, his voice carrying special reverence when mentioning the absent man. It requires the direct signature of Mr. Arthur Sterling. And he just sent me a message. He finished his retreat earlier than expected. Mr. Henderson glanced at his pocket watch. In fact, Mr. Sterling is already in this building, and he will walk through that door right now. The name Arthur Sterling was like a spell that completely changed the atmosphere in the room. The greedy murmurs stopped instantly. Everyone simultaneously adjusted their ties, sat up straight, their expressions automatically shifting to a state of extreme reverence. Julian Drake's heart pounded. He wasn't afraid. On the contrary, extreme excitement surged through his veins. If he could present this $50 million contract to legend Arthur Sterling right now, the CEO chair would surely be his forever. No one could refuse someone who brought in this much money. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the carpeted hallway outside. The gold-plated brass doorknob turned. Julian hurriedly buttoned his vest and took a deep breath. He crafted his most perfect smile, took long, confident steps toward the door, bowed slightly, and held out his arm, ready to receive the handshake of a billionaire. The heavy double oak doors were pushed open. Light from the lobby chandelier spilled in, casting the silhouette of a man onto the carpet. "Sterling, it is truly an immense honor for me to—" Julian's smooth voice was abruptly cut off. Every sound seemed to be squeezed by an invisible hand in his throat. His outstretched hand froze in midair, rigid as a statue carved from ice. Julian's pupils contracted. The blood in his veins seemed to stop flowing, turning ice cold. Stepping through the most powerful door in the building was not a billionaire in a shiny Brioni suit, nor a man exuding the scent of cigars and luxury. It was an elderly man. Although he had now traded his blue jumpsuit for a simple dark wool vest, the forehead carved with deep wrinkles, the eyes as calm as an abyss, and in particular those calloused, rough hands. Julian could never forget them. It was Richard, the lowly janitor, the person he called trash parasite. The man he had ordered to kneel and clean his shoes just hours earlier, whose name tag he had ripped off, and whom he had kicked out of the building in ultimate humiliation. The janitor stood right in front of Julian. But this time, he wasn't holding a mop. He was walking in to claim the throne at the center of the room. Julian Drake's legs suddenly turned to jelly. He staggered back 3 steps, his expensive heels catching on the carpet edge, causing him to almost fall. The grand boardroom suddenly seemed to spin. Cold sweat poured out of him, running down his temples, soaking the collar of his perfect white silk shirt. He stared at the man standing at the door. It was impossible. The brain of a Harvard graduate was screaming, trying to reject the irrational reality playing out before his eyes. What are you doing here?" Julian stammered, his voice shaky, broken, having completely lost the authoritative tone of the man who just announced bringing in $50 million. He turned sharply to the board members, waving his hands in panic. "Security, where is security? Why did you let this lazy janitor in here? Get him out." The silence in the room was now so thick it could be cut with a knife. The 10 board members looked at Julian with astonishment mixed with pity. Mr. Henderson frowned, slowly stood up, buttoned his jacket, and snapped, "Have you lost your mind, Julian? What janitor? What gibberish are you spouting? Have you never even looked at a photo of the man who has been paying your salary for the last 2 years?" Mr. Henderson stepped out of his seat and bowed at a respectful 45-degree angle toward the door. "Welcome back, Mr. Arthur Sterling, founder and owner of 62% of Vanguard Tech's shares." Mr. Arthur Sterling, those 3 words hit Julian's eardrums like 3 sledgehammers. The earth beneath his feet cracked open. His vision darkened, leaving only flashing blind spots. Founder, largest shareholder? The janitor in the blue suit, the disconnected pieces, the calm, deep eyes, the strange composure when humiliated, the sentence without the bottom, "There is no top," all slammed together, forming a horrifying picture that slapped his extreme arrogance straight in the face. Arthur didn't bother looking at Julian. He swept past the petrified VP as if passing through empty space. The only sound in the room was his steady footsteps on the wood floor. Arthur slowly sat in the largest leather chair at the center. He adjusted his cuffs, then swept his ice-cold gaze around the room finally. His eyes stopped on the $50 million contract resting in the middle of the table. He reached out his hands, scarred and rough from a lifetime of labor, and pulled the contract toward him. He flipped through the first 2 pages casually, then folded it with a sharp thud. "I did not go to Switzerland," Arthur spoke. His voice was deep and warm, devoid of the sharpness of an angry man, but it carried the weight of an impending landslide. "I have been resting right here in my own company for the last 3 months. I wore the jumpsuit. I scrubbed the toilets, emptied the trash cans, and listened to the most authentic sounds that you, sitting in this luxurious, air-conditioned room, would never hear. He slowly turned his head, locking a gaze as sharp as a razor directly onto Julian. Julian pulled his head back, his breathing ragged, both hands clutching the edge of the mahogany table to keep from collapsing to the floor. "I was there at 7:30 a.m. when you threw the coffee cup in the receptionist's face," Arthur said, his pace extremely slow. "I was there at 8:00 a.m. when you threatened to fire Mark while his wife was on the delivery table facing death. And this morning, when you slipped on the puddle, do you know who woke up at 4 a.m. to polish that floor? When you went home to rest after a day of shouting and trampling others? Who stayed behind to clean up the mess you made?" Julian's lips trembled violently. He tried to open his mouth, but his dry throat couldn't produce a sound. "You said people at the bottom don't create surplus value," Arthur continued, his voice becoming sharper. He pointed at the contract. "You brought in $50 million, true. You are a perfect money-printing machine. But you have stripped away the soul of this place. You judge a person's worth by the clothes they wear and their bank balance. You thought cruelty was strength, but in reality it was just a shell for your cheap arrogance." "Mr. Sterling, sir." Julian finally found a weak, trembling voice. He whimpered, tears of humiliation beginning to stream down. It was a misunderstanding. I didn't know who you were. If I had known it was you, I swear I would never have." "That is exactly the problem, Julian." Arthur suddenly slammed his hand down onto the table. The strike of a man who had labored his whole life carried a terrifying force. The whole room jumped. "You only respect others when you know they have more power than you. You are willing to kneel before a billionaire. But you forced a janitor old enough to be your father to kneel and clean your shoes. Vanguard Tech was built by my sweat, blood, and kindness. I would rather burn this building to the ground with my own hands than hand it over to someone as cold-blooded as you." Silence fell. Julian completely collapsed. He dropped to one knee, his hands covering his face, trying to cling to a last shred of hope. "Please, sir. I can make you $100 million next quarter. I will apologize to everyone. Please don't take my career away." Arthur looked at him with contemptuous pity. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a crumpled, wrinkled piece of paper. It was the termination notice Julian had thrown at the janitor that morning. He placed it on the table, smoothed it out, and then slid it along the polished wood with 2 fingers. The paper slid with a quiet rustling sound, then stopped right at the edge of the table, falling straight in front of Julian, who was kneeling on the floor. "You were right this morning, Mr. Drake. Someone useless who sabotages the efforts of others needs to be kicked out of this building." Arthur jerked his chin toward the door, delivering the final, irrevocable verdict. "You are fired, Julian. No severance pay. I will personally take over the Tokyo contract. Pack your things and get out of my company." The boardroom doors swung open immediately. 2 large security guards walked in. Ironically, it was the same 2 guards Julian had forced to kick Richard out that morning. Now there was no hesitation on their faces, only a satisfied smirk. They walked over, not showing the slightest bit of mercy, gripped the arrogant VP's arms, and hauled him up. Julian's expensive Tom Ford suit was disheveled, his tie crooked. He no longer had the strength to resist, his feet dragging across the carpet as he was hauled out of the room filled with contemptuous gazes. The sound of the oak doors closing slammed the door shut on Julian Drake's illustrious career. The air in the room seemed to be drained of its poison. Arthur Sterling let out a breath, his expression relaxing back to its inherent calm and benevolence. He reached up to straighten his jacket button. Looking at the 10 board members sitting motionless, he smiled slightly. "Now," Arthur said calmly, "let's begin our meeting to discuss restoring maternity leave for the engineering team and giving a 15% raise to the cleaning department. Any objections? Power and money never actually define or change a person's character. They are merely magnifying glasses that amplify the true nature hidden deep within, how you treat those at the bottom of society." Those who seem to offer you no economic or social benefit is the most accurate and raw measure of your worth as a human being. Julian Drake deluded himself into believing that cruelty and coldness would take him to the pinnacle of power. He thought he was casting a large net to seize the entire company after the $50 million contract. But he never realized that it was his own blind arrogance and contempt for others that dug a deep pit to bury his entire career in a split second. Conversely, Arthur Sterling left behind a costly lesson about the truth of truly great leaders. The pinnacle of glory is not a place for you to trample on others, but a place where you have enough strength to bend down, protect, and lift up those who are weaker than you. Without a solid foundation at the bottom, every peak is just a castle built on sand, dear audience. What do you think of this ending for the arrogant VP? Was that punishment enough, or did he deserve an even bitterer lesson? Please share your thoughts and feelings right in the comments section. We always read and appreciate all of your opinions. If today's story brought you a sense of satisfaction, helped you relieve some stress in life, and reinforced your belief in karma, don't hesitate to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is the greatest motivation for us to continue producing better quality videos. We will return with countless dramatic stories, satisfying turnarounds, and the deepest life lessons waiting for you ahead. Thank you for staying with us until the very last second. Goodbye. Have a day full of joy and see you in the next video.